Hey there, in today's episode I thought we'd do something a little different and take a look at the characters we still haven't gotten from C8, who could still potentially show up down the road, and what they would add to the game if so. This one's going to be way too much for one video, however, so I'm going to split this into a different one for each individual faction down the line. So for now, we're going to start out with the first of all the Game 1 expansions, that being the Beastmen. So kick back, grab a drink, and let's get straight into it.
Wow.
So, a few rules before we get started. 1. These characters must be from official sources, so Games Workshop, White Dwarf, War Master, etc. 2. The races that aren't in the games currently we won't touch upon, so no Airby, no Kislev, so on and so forth. That being said, we will still take a look at factions that aren't in the game yet, so different Empire provinces, vampiric bloodlines, dwarf strongholds, and all of that kind of stuff. That's all fair game. 3. They must be somewhat lore accurate. I have no problems ignoring deaths where it makes sense to, or moving someone to a different faction if that makes sense, but no completely ridiculous examples. So, for an example of this, Morkor would be completely precluded from being on the Norse character list, given the fact that they're super 100% dead by the time of Total Warhammer, and making them alive again would usurp a ton of other lore. Something small and forgivable in the Norskin list for comparison, such as Lord Morkan, if he came back or survived or whatever, we could overlook it because it wouldn't really impact any other lore for the games. But anyways, back to the Beastmen. So the Beastmen do have a few characters left, and I've covered a few of them already in some of my Monogod videos, but we'll briefly retouch upon them anyways. The way I would imagine the Beastmen getting fleshed out once more would be, again, through the aforementioned Monogod packs. So rather than having just Beastmen specific Lord packs, I would group up all your Khornate Lords, all your Slaaneshi Lords, what have you, and do 4. One for Norska, one for Beastmen, one for Warriors of Chaos, one for Demons of Chaos. All that being said, there is still a single unaligned option left on the table, which you could put in a conventional Lord pack. And if you've ever heard the joke, though, about Games Workshop not caring about the Beastmen, boy oh boy does it ever show up in their name character count. This is going to be by far the shortest video of all the factions. I think they have the least amount of named characters out of every single faction. And even amongst this, several of these that I'm about to say are lore only. They never got rules or representation on the tabletop. Anyways, though, that's enough intro. Let's get started, and we'll start with the unaligned one first. Our opening bid is going to be Ungrel Forhorn. He is an undivided option who also happens to be a complete betrayer of the Beastmen, and as a result of that would likely start out at war with literally every other Beastmen faction. His name comes from the fact that after killing both his chieftain and his Bray Shaman, he strapped the horns out of the former onto one of his heads and the horns of the latter onto his other head. While he's capable of a little bit of wild magic, he is a far better combatant than he is a mage, and would likely use spells to boost his capabilities when in combat, rather than just staying back and casting spells outside of combat. In the campaign, he would be focused on, I would assume, taking over all the other Beastmen tribes, probably violently, with his little merry band of Beastmen and mutants. But I could also see him having a bit of a Waaagh-like mechanic, wherein he can have like outcast sort of recruits if he gets powerful enough. Anyways, the Beastmen are due for an update either before Game 3 or at least close to launch afterwards, and I'd personally argue that Ungrel Forhorn makes the most sense to add for that update, way before any of the aligned options. For one, it leaves the aforementioned Monogod packs wide open. For 2, he'd have an easier time getting unaligned content into the game than any of the aligned ones would. And for 3, his story makes him not only easy to add for his own lore, but also as an objective for other Beastmen Lords down the line. Anyways, for new stuff that could be tacked on with him, for new units, there's actually quite a few unaligned ones left, but first and foremost, the most obvious gaps that are extremely easy to fill, and in my opinion should be filled in with the free update. Greater Bray Shamans would require next to no effort to put in there. You could literally reuse almost everything from the standard Bray Shaman, which would give the Beastmen a second Lord choice, because it's mind-blowing, only have one right now. And Doom Bulls would again be painfully easy to add as a third Lord choice, because once again, almost everything from the Gore Bulls could be reused. Anyways, but going on to his own exclusive stuff, Turnskins, Mutants, and Brays would all be extremely thematic units to add, given that they are also outcasts and unwanted amongst the Beastmen, which ties in perfectly to Ungrel himself. Lastly, Gorgons, while not really exclusively or thematic at all to Ungrel, could still be added in at the same time for a sort of generalized Beastmen unit, because I know a lot of people are waiting on that one. Alright, moving over to Monogods, our first pick is the most commonly requested Beastmen Legendary Lord by a country mile, and he serves Khorne exclusively. I'm of course talking about Taurox the Brass Bull. If his name didn't give it away, Taurox is a large bull-like creature whose flesh is made of brass. Shocking, I know. Taurox isn't actually the first Beastman Khorne graced with brass flesh. That would actually be Augrax, a character who was essentially Taurox 1.0. However, he was completely wasted in order to make Archaon seem super powerful in one of his lore snippets. I mean, seriously, they were a complete 100% waste of lore from GW. There's no point pointing out that Khorne himself not only graced you with an incredibly powerful follower, but also one that they themselves graced with brass flesh, which you then kill to quench your sword. If I were Khorne, I would have choked the life out of you right then and there. But anyways, though, I'll stop whining about Augrax. Brass Bull 2.0 isn't a completely stupid bit of writing and actually represents everything you would expect from a Khornate character. He's got excessive rage, tons of gore, and a love for close quarters combat. In the lore, he's somewhat focused on destroying Talabheim, but given that he also seems to get distracted every 3 seconds to go kill something else, he actually never really seems to get anything accomplished. His campaign elements would probably forfeit the stealth and the magic of the Beastmen in exchange for just raw power increases, which would make him a far riskier campaign experience, but also a very unique one. For units, I would toss in the Bovagors to represent Khorne's mastery of close quarters combat, because that's essentially what the Bovagars are, better close quarters Ungors. In exchange, too, you could also have Blood Bowls and Khorngors, just to give him a little bit more of a flavorful element for his own campaign. Alright, so that's the one big Chaos God down. Let's move over to the other big Chaos God, that being Nurgle, and his representative being Moloch Slugtongue. Much like how Taurox isn't actually directly listed as a Khornate being in spite of clearly being one, Slugtongue also isn't listed as being a Nurgle worshipper in spite of the fact that he is effectively a walking disease on 2 hooves. He also does have a somewhat Tzeentchian nature in that his followers always end up getting starving and angry and about to turn on him, but before they can kill him, they end up getting trampled and eaten by a new army that eliminates his would-be killers for him, and then that new army effectively becomes his new followers, repeating the process all over again. He is also a wizard character, and that's something that the Beastmen are already kind of chock full of, but he would most likely have a huge debuffing presence on the campaign map and poor relations, even with other Beastmen, so at least maybe his campaign experience could be made different. I'll just briefly say, too, the Harbinger is also a Nurgle-aligned Beastman, but he makes no sense to be his own legendary lord because he is 100% subservient to Malagor, so maybe making him a legendary hero or something makes sense, but definitely not a legendary lord option. For gameplay, Slugtongue would effectively have loyalty and food mechanics, and I would have them tie in with each other. As your armies grow hungry, their desire to abandon you gets stronger and stronger until they eventually betray you. For new content, the first 2 options would be pretty obvious. You would of course do Pestigors and Plague Bulls, and then I would also throw in the Wargors in as a support hero option as well, given the Beastmen's relative lack of hero choices even after we give them more Lord choices from earlier. Speaking of Beastmen I've discussed in other videos, Slaaneish's representative would be Gorus Warhoof. Again, in the lore they are technically listed as unaligned. However, they're also labeled a proud, boisterous, womanizing drunkard, and if you heard that someone was a proud, boisterous, womanizing drunkard, what Chaos God would immediately jump into your head? They are apparently the father of the entire Centaur race. I say apparently because that lore comes from Gorus Warhoof himself, who's known to be a bit of a blowhard. So you could see him having a ton of bonuses to the Centaurs, right? I could also see him having 2 major stances, one that improves campaign movement range, and the other one that actually stops campaign movement range, but gives you a ton of replenishment. For the latter one, you could effectively assume that he is stopped for some inappropriate activities. Like I said, I've already covered him pretty extensively in the Slaanesh Monogod video, however, so if you want to learn more about his lore side of things, I'll leave a link for it down below. In addition to the number of bonuses he would have to the Centaur units due to being their drunken baby daddy, I would also add in Slangors and Slanbulls to him, just because, Slaanesh makes sense, as well as Pratons, because I think they could be an extremely amazing addition to this army in particular, being these beautiful but corrupted great stags. Not only from a gameplay perspective, because they'd be fast enough to actually keep up with a Centaur-themed army, but also from the fact that they are sort of these beautiful but corrupted creatures, which ties in extremely well to a Slaaneshi themed army. Speaking of things that tie in extremely well, if we couldn't do Praetons, the other option I would maybe pick would be Capragors. They're apparently just slightly better than Ungors, but that's not really down to their talent or their strength or anything. It's literally down to how they look. So again, I feel like that would be a rather appropriate pick for a Slaaneshi themed army. But I saved the best for last. The last lord I'm most excited for, and I don't mean just from the Beastmen, I mean from everything, is Moonclaw. This Tzeentchian being is a literal alien, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. They literally come from outer space. This weird, bizarre creature is random, impossible to understand, and causes insanity just with his very presence. He is essentially a Lovecraft character. To put it differently, though, he is actually pretty much a perfect representation of Tzeentch's weirdness, and that's one of the things I love most about Tzeentch. He's surrounded by a green, glowing flame cloak, I should say, and is the only Beastman character that I'm aware of to ride around on an actual mount, not a chariot. I'll take a much, much deeper dive into him whenever I do my Tzeentchian Monogod video, but until then, know that this is the character I want the absolute most to show up in this game. For new mechanics, I would just say take the Morslab events thing and just amplify the loving crap out of it, because effectively all of Moonclaw's power comes from Morslab's position in the sky. I would also maybe give him a presence that demoralizes both friend and foe alike, but if that's going to be too much work or causes too many balance disruptions or people hate it, they could always just be lazy and give him Causes Terror. For new units, you could do Sandbulls and Sangors, which would pair up alongside the unit CAs insist that is too difficult to add, that being the Jabberslythe. The Jabberslythe would be a fast, monstrous unit, presumably with anti-large, rampage, and the Causes Terror attribute, though again, much like Moonclaw, they're known to eat the Beastman's own troops, so he should actually demoralize both sides, not just the enemy side. But again, I could see CA thinking that that makes for a kind of unusable attribute, so I would leave that side in their pick. Anyways, in case you're wondering why one of the characters you were expecting to see wasn't on the list, I will explain them all now. Ograx was left off the list because he is dead, and dead in such a way that you could never really justify bringing him back, also due to piss poor writing. Gorthor is also dead due to extremely good writing, but again, dead in such a way you could never justify having him return. Bragash, I simply left off the list due to a relative lack of lore. They could, in theory, put him on there, but it would kind of be a wasted slot in my eyes. Anyways, that's going to be it for this particular list. Next time we'll take a look at the other Game 1 expansion, that being the Wood Elves, so stay tuned for that. Just before we conclude completely, though, I do want to say there won't be a What's New Wednesday this week, nor a mod review this week. I'm actually going to have been away for the weekend prior to this video by the time you watch it, so I simply won't have enough time to get to all of them. We'll go back to the normal schedule the week after, though. As always, I appreciate you spending time with me, though, and I'll see you all next time.